It's 5 in the morning on Sunday, December 28th, 2014. An Airbus A320, operated by the Indonesian offshoot of AirAsia, was preparing to push back from the gate at Juanda International Airport in Surabaya on the Indonesian island of Java. AirAsia Flight 8501 was a short-haul hop over to Singapore, and nearly every seat was booked for this 2.5-hour flight across the Java Sea. 162 passengers and crew turned up at the gate in Surabaya and boarded the aircraft. Curiously though, a total of 23 passengers never showed up for the flight, including a family of 10 who intended to travel to Singapore for New Year's celebrations. They arrived at the airport too late, by which point the doors were closed and they missed their flight. Most of the 155 passengers were Indonesian, mostly adults, but a total of 17 children were also on the flight. Among them was one infant. By 5:30 that morning, the jetway was disconnected and the Airbus was pushed back from the gate. This was expected to be a routine flight, a normal morning shift for the pilots and flight attendants. Though surely for many passengers, the flight would have been an opportunity to catch up on some sleep. The pilots began taxiing the plane down to the far western side of the airport for a departure from runway 10. The flight crew themselves consisted of just 2 people on the flight deck. Captain Irianto was a highly experienced pilot. His total flight hours amounted to greater than 20,000 in total. At 53 years of age, he was recruited into the Indonesian Air Force in his early aviating career. He spent a decade piloting the F-5 and F-16 fighter jets. Once leaving the military, taking early retirement, he transitioned into commercial aviation, where he became acquainted first with the Boeing 737, flying for multiple Indonesian carriers, including Surabaya Airlines, Merpati, and Adamair. This was before joining the Indonesian offshoot of AirAsia, back when they flew Boeing 737s. When the airline overhauled their fleet, he was brought over to the Airbus A320. By the time of the accident, Irianto had accumulated over 4,500 hours in the Airbus. The first officer sat in the right seat was much less experienced. 46-year-old Remy Emmanuel Plaisel was actually, as you can probably tell by his name, a French national from Martinique in the Caribbean. Plaisel was a man who had a bit of a career change. He left his old job in the energy industry and set his sights on aviation. He landed himself a job with AirAsia right out of flying school, relocating to Indonesia in 2012. Due to his short tenure as a pilot, given his circumstances, most of his 2,200 total flight hours was recorded in the A320. First Officer Plaisel loved what he did and stayed connected to his Caribbean background. He was actually head of a Caribbean Pilots Association, and before every flight, he would even call his mom just to say he was doing okay. The plane the 2 men were commanding that morning was only 6 years old, but had in that time between 2008 and the accident performed 13,610 flights. Flight 8501, Flight 13,611 would be its final one. 5:35. Now positioned on the runway, the Airbus's 2 CFM56 engines were powered up. For this flight, First Officer Plaisel was the pilot flying. Captain Irianto was monitoring his performance and handling radio communications. The pilots lock the Airbus thrust controls into their automated position, and the plane takes to the skies. Though Surabaya had seen a thunderstorm the previous day, the skies had cleared up over Java with only passing clouds at the time of Flight 8501's departure. As normal, following their flight plan, the pilots make a left turn to join their assigned airway. The flight plan was already programmed into the flight computer, and, as it turns out, there happens to be a single airway, the M635, that would take Flight 8501 all the way to Singapore. The Airbus already being a highly automated aircraft, the pilots switched on the autopilot, joined the M635 airway, and managed the plane accordingly. The pilots, after departure, switched their radios over to the Ujung Pandang station. Over the next 15 minutes, the plane climbs up to its assigned cruising altitude of 32,000 feet. With the seatbelt sign now switched off, the passengers began settling in for the 2-hour journey ahead, the flight attendants beginning their cabin service. Let's talk a little bit about the flight for a moment. This journey over to Singapore would take the plane over the equator. Now, the equatorial climate around the planet can be a bit unpredictable. In meteorology, in reference to this confluence of the tropics, this region is given a name, the Intertropical Convergence Zone. The meeting of different weather systems, we're talking differences in temperature and pressure over the equator, enables an environment of extreme weather. This can present a problem for pilots and airlines. Massive storms can form in the way of many flight paths. A few videos ago, we looked at the case of Braniff International Flight 352, which is a case study into why severe storms should generally be avoided by pilots. Modern planes, though, are designed to withstand the elements. Still, storms are avoided and navigated by use of modern weather radars and communication with ATC. Pilots who fly in and around Indonesia should be well adjusted and prepared to navigate such stormy regions. North of their position, a large storm was present, so from the perspective of Flight 8501, they were flying towards it. The pilots became aware of the bad weather ahead and took steps to deviate. The weather itself included towering cumulonimbus thunderstorm clouds that peaked at around 44,000 feet in altitude. They switched the seatbelt signs back on to get the passengers seated and secured. At 5:57, a flight attendant picks up the public address system and makes an announcement to passengers regarding the bumpy weather ahead. Now, for the pilots, at 6 a.m., the weather would suddenly become the least of the pilots' problems. At 6:01 in the morning, a noise was emitted from inside of the flight deck that sounded a little bit like this. This followed an amber-colored caution indicating a fault on the Airbus's Electronic Centralized Aircraft Monitoring System, ECAM for short. ECAM comes in the form of a set of screens in the center of the main cockpit panel. Multiple pages can be selected and cycled through to monitor an incredible level of detail in the aircraft systems. Airbus implemented this revolutionary piece of equipment as far back as the Airbus A310. It shows detailed engine information, electrical systems info, hydraulics, the status of the doors, and so on. However, staying on the main ECAM display here, not only do we have a detailed breakdown of what the engines are doing, located here is a sort of message display. This will flash important messages to a pilot along with detailing a series of steps right there on the display for the pilot to follow in order to troubleshoot the apparent problem. This was the warning the pilots received at 6 a.m. on the morning of December 28, 2014. Auto Flight Rudder Travel Limiter System. You might now be thinking, what the heck is that? So it's here we reach a pivotal event in the sequence of this disaster. To understand not only what this fault is, but also the pilot's response and how the rest of the flight unfolded, we're going to need to familiarize ourselves with the anatomy of the Airbus A320. The Airbus A320. Though it is a plane we have looked at before as well as other Airbus planes, this accident requires a more intimate understanding of how the plane works. Here's a good place to start. When Airbus is brought up in aviation circles, you'll no doubt hear the term fly-by-wire thrown around. Fly-by-wire is a system, and maybe even think of it as a philosophy of flight controls, operated not by mechanical inputs made by the pilot, but rather via electronic inputs fed to a series of computers within the plane. The A320 was the first passenger plane to implement digital fly-by-wire technology for regular use, though fly-by-wire as a concept has been around for much longer, even being implemented on some level on planes such as Concorde. What this means when looking at the A320 is that flight control inputs made on the side stick or from the autopilot, the inputs demanded sends an instruction, an electrical signal down the titular wire to those onboard flight computers. On the A320, there are several flight control computers. Let's run through them. There are 2 elevator aileron computers, or ELACs. These are connected to the pilot controls in the flight deck and feed instructions to other computers. There are 3 computers responsible for governing the spoilers on the wings and the standby elevators. These 3 are known as the SECs, spoiler elevator computers. Additionally, there are 2 computers that operate the flaps. The final 2, here we edge towards the real focus of today, is the FAC, the Flight Augmentation Computers. These are responsible for a number of different functions, mainly involving the rudder. So, rudder movement, yaw damper functionality, rudder trim, and rudder travel limitation. Keep that one in mind. Though the pilot rudder pedals are actually connected to the ELACs, they then communicate with the flight augmentation computers, which then moves the rudder as desired. I'd like you to keep a hold of the FAC and its rudder responsibility for now. We'll come back to it when looking at the AirAsia accident. So, stepping back for a minute. When an Airbus pilot wants to manipulate the flight control surfaces, the instructions sent from the side stick or the numerous other sources make their way to this series of flight control computers. They then actuate the hydraulic functions necessary to move the ailerons, elevator, rudder, and spoilers to the desired state. This is in contrast to a conventional airplane where the flight controls are directly linked to the pilot's control wheel. This also explains why the Airbus side stick has no force feedback on the flight controls, because it's not actually directly connected to them. Why do this then? Why was a plane designed this way? What are the benefits of this? Well, for one thing, this makes the Airbus A320 lighter due to not needing so much mechanical equipment on board. This, in turn, also reduces the maintenance associated with the flight controls. Less moving parts, less maintenance, lesser costs. Happy airline executives. However, the big benefits of fly-by-wire really begin to shine when we talk about safety. Because of this computer middleman, pilots and the flying public are offered a number of protection systems. Fly-by-wire gives you flight envelope protection. In aviation, the flight envelope is an indication of an aircraft's performance. You will usually see it depicted on a chart that plots the range and limits of an aircraft's flyability. There are a few different plot examples, but you'll often see a chart with load factor on the y-axis and airspeed on the x-axis. The flight envelope in this example highlighted here defines the normal operating range of a plane, the safe zone. So long as a pilot keeps their airplane at the appropriate airspeed, anywhere within this range, doesn't reach extreme altitudes and otherwise does not induce significant loads onto the plane, they'll be fine. Here, the plane is controllable in stable flight. It was here where AirAsia 8501 found itself before its final moments. An airplane can be brought outside of the flight envelope and be done so in multiple ways. If airspeed drastically increases, structural damage can be inflicted on an aircraft if it is pushed outside of the normal range. Pulling the plane into an overbank can also bring it outside of the flight envelope, as would a high angle of attack at a low airspeed, inducing an aerodynamic stall. So if speed decreases and falls outside of the envelope in the opposite direction, well then we reach the stall range. Obviously, I am oversimplifying this a lot here, but the point is, what Airbus's fly-by-wire does is allow a pilot to operate the plane within this normal range, but will step in if it feels it is approaching a scenario where the plane could be flying outside of the envelope. These flight envelope protections include pitch attitude protection, angle of attack protection, overspeed protection, and load factor limitation. So, under normal circumstances, if an Airbus pilot tries to stall their plane by continually pulling back on the side stick, for example, the protection systems will kick in and override the pilot inputs and drop the nose. The same also goes for an overbank scenario. Airbus calls this state when all of these functions are working as intended. They call this normal law. When in normal law, a pilot cannot overbank, overspeed, or stall the aircraft. The plane just won't let them. It will intervene by limiting the roll, reducing engine power, or manipulate the pitch to prevent it from doing so. I'm going to let that sit with you for now. In the meantime, let's return to the FAC, the Flight Augmentation Computer, and the failure warning that appeared on the ECAM of Flight 8501, Auto Flight Rudder Travel Limiter System. The FAC, as we mentioned before, responsible for commanding movements of the rudder. As part of that responsibility, it is to limit over-travel of the rudder. Therefore, the FACs communicate with the Rudder Travel Limiter Unit, the RTLU, and it was here where the notable error occurred. And get this was not the first time that Captain Irianto had seen this caution on this very plane. When investigators later looked over the maintenance logs of the accident plane, they discovered a recorded incident which occurred 3 days previously, on Christmas Day no less, and it just so happens that Captain Irianto was there to bear witness to it. So let's break down the deets. On December 25th, 2014, the captain, as he was preparing to depart from Surabaya for a flight to Kuala Lumpur, received the same message on the ECAM after the plane had pushed back from the gate, having just started the engines. The safety-conscious pilot took the action to return to the stand and reported the issue to an engineer who was on board the aircraft. An AirAsia engineer came to the cockpit to assist the pilots. Reportedly referring to the troubleshooting manual, the engineer quickly fixed the problem by turning to the circuit breaker panel and pulling the breakers related to the flight augmentation computer, the FAC, resetting FACs 1 and 2. Following some quick testing, it appeared that the rudder limiter fault had been resolved. Critically, Captain Irianto asked the engineer if he could perform the same action of pulling the circuit breakers and resetting the flight augmentation computers himself, to address the issue should it rear itself again. The engineer's response, according to the accident report, was, yes, sure, if they are instructed to do so on the ECAM. Resetting these critical flight control computers like this is something that is really only ever done on the ground. To do this in the air would break standard operating procedures and could alter the status of the fly-by-wire system, which could lead to a loss of a number of those protection systems we mentioned earlier. And it's not like an airline captain with 20,000 flight hours to do something like that, right? I mean, he wouldn't just disable a critical system like that in the air. But this December 25th incident was not over yet. Though the engineer appeared to fix the problem there and then, the same message reappeared when they were ready to depart again. Running through the steps as indicated on the pilot's ECAM display, it persisted. The supposed rudder issue was still present. Sensing there was still an issue, the same AirAsia engineer picked up the intercom and communicated with the captain. The first officer left his seat to reset the circuit breakers on the FACs, but still the RTLU message was still there. The engineer requested to postpone the flight and return again to the gate. This time the passengers were disembarked, anticipating this fix could take longer than expected. During this time, Flight Augmentation Computer 2, FAC 2, was replaced. The engines were then started and the amber caution seemed to disappear. The plane progressed with the now delayed journey to Kuala Lumpur and even returned without incident. This alert rearing itself on December 25th was absolutely not an isolated incident. Obviously, it reappeared on the accident flight, and we'll get into what happened next soon. But discounting that for just a moment, believe it or not, this same error in the whole year of 2014 was reported a total of 23 times before the eventual accident on December 28th. 23 rudder limiter cautions, 1 in January, 1 in February, 0 occurrences in March and April, then 1 every month from May through September, 2 in October, 5 in November, and 9 in December. As you can see when plotted out on a graph, this was not only a persistent issue, but it was growing exponentially common. In fact, between December 25th and the accident, in that 3-day window, it appeared again on December 27th. So this really begs the question, what was actually causing these rudder limiter cautions? Clearly something was wrong here. However, whatever it was It evidently wasn't serious enough that it impaired the aircraft to the point of justifying it being withdrawn from service until the issue was fully for sure resolved. Investigators were able to salvage much of AirAsia 8501's wreckage, including the rudder travel limiter unit. The unit was sent to France for analysis with the BEA. Investigators, from their analysis of the electronics inside of the unit, were able to find where these errors were coming from, and here is what they had to say. The activation of master caution was triggered by a malfunction of the rudder travel limiter unit. Examination of the RTLU concluded that the failure of the unit was caused by cracked soldering of the electronic module of both channel A and B, as a result of the thermal cycles associated to on-off power and ground flight conditions, and generated a fatigue phenomenon of the soldering. The crack of the soldering electronic module resulted in intermittent failure of the RTLU. This problem was actually something that was known to occur on the Airbus. Since 1993, Airbus has issued a total of 3 technical follow-ups regarding the possibility of fatigue on these solder joints. Airlines and mechanics had been reporting this issue to the manufacturer. Therefore, they began looking into it in the early 1990s, issuing guidance of fatigue rupture of soldering in 1996. The same phenomenon was looked at again in the 2000s, as Airbus continued to receive reports of similar occurrences. Despite revisions to the processes by which the soldering was done and improvements to the electronic boards inside these units, the investigation concluded that the rudder travel limiter unit on the Axton AirAsia plane conformed to both of these technical follow-ups. In other words, the plane had actually been maintained in accordance with Airbus's guidance. As a result of these findings, after the accident, the same issue was to be looked at once again for the 3rd time. So to reiterate what was said in the accident report, the reason as to why this tiny cracking of the solder joints is so pertinent to this investigation is because it's believed this caused interference with the electrical signal between the rudder travel limiter unit and the rest of the plane. The intermittent signal produced those messages on the pilot's ECAM display. We now know what this error was and what was causing it. So how did the pilots respond? Well, at 6 a.m. when the fault first appeared on the ECAM, the pilot flying, in this case First Officer Plaisel, verbally commented, "ECAM action." The display gave a number of steps for the pilots to follow. The flight data recorder here recorded the flight crew taking those steps as per the ECAM instructions. The procedure presented to the pilots included resetting the flight augmentation computers on the overhead panel, pushing the FAC buttons to switch them off and then on again individually. It appeared at this point the caution ceased and the RTLUs returned to normal. We don't know what was going through the captain's head here, but I can't imagine he would have been all too pleased to see this warning again. I could easily imagine he'd have been very frustrated to see that same message that caused such a headache a few days previously. With the error seemingly rectified, the captain radios the controllers requesting a route deviation to the west of their position, this being to avoid the stormy weather ahead. The controller clears them for the deviation and the plane changes course, turning to heading 310. From this moment on, the weather would have absolutely no influence on the events of the accident. 6:06. A conversation between the 2 pilots was recorded, detailing engine failure, emergency descent procedures, and alternate airport information. For the next 3 minutes, the flight appeared to be normal. 6:09. For a second time, Auto Flight Rudder Travel Limiter System reappeared on the ECAM, accompanied by an audible alert. Captain Irianto and First Officer Plaisel confusingly reperformed the same steps, and the fault once again disappeared. 2 minutes later, AirAsia 8501 would be handed off to controllers in Jakarta, the captain informing them of the deviation they had already taken. The Jakarta controller replied, identifying them on the radar. The plane's transponder is providing controllers with detailed flight information such as heading, altitude, airspeed, and of course the flight number itself. Everything looks completely normal on their end. Shortly after, AirAsia 8501 gets on frequency again, and asks for permission to climb up to flight level 380. Standard pressure indicated altitude of 38,000 feet. This request was not granted at this time. Instead, the controller put the pilots on standby. Back on board the Airbus, at 6:13, the same caution reappears on the ECAM for a third time. Once again, they reset the FAC computers using the overhead panel. Like clockwork, the error went away again. So to put that into perspective, between 6 o'clock and 6:13, the same error message appeared a total of 3 times. On all 3 occasions, the pilots seemingly rectified the issue as the error disappeared. But they couldn't fix the problem. They didn't know that the poor condition of the electronic board inside the rudder travel limiter unit was dropping signal intermittently and causing these errors. They had no idea of this. 6:15. For a 4th time, the rudder limiter message appears on the ECAM. This time, no doubt frustrated, the pilots did not follow the same procedure they had done on the previous occasions. 2 minutes later, at 6:16, ATC radios a clearance for Flight 8501 to climb to flight level 340, 34,000 feet, but this message went unanswered. The probable reasoning for them missing this transmission was that the investigation believed that Captain Irianto had left his seat, turned to the circuit breakers, and attempted to perform the same resetting of the flight augmentation computer he had seen the AirAsia engineer do 3 days previously. By that we mean he went to reset the FAC computer circuit breakers in the air. Though the FAC1 circuit breaker is located on the overhead panel, the FAC2 circuit breaker is located on a panel behind the first officer. Up till this point, the A320 was flying more or less normally. The fly-by-wire system was engaged under that normal law we mentioned earlier. The first officer at the flight controls, the plane was under control. But when the flight augmentation computer was reset by use of the breakers, that was when things began to drift from suspected fault to catastrophe. We have now reached what we'll call the sequence of disaster. Almost immediately, the plane's autopilot and autothrust disconnects. Faults related to the now reset FAC computers now show up on the ECAM. The Airbus fly-by-wire has changed. It's no longer under normal law. It is now reverted to what is called alternate law, this meaning that the multitude of protections that are usually in place have now been disconnected. The plane's rudder has deflected 2 degrees to the left. In this state, this translates into a left bank. The first officer, still sat in the right seat, doesn't notice the bank right away. His side stick remains stationary for nearly 10 seconds. Meanwhile, the plane rolls through 30, 40, then 50 degrees of bank to a maximum of 54 degrees. When he does realize what's happening, startled by the actions of the plane, he grabs the side stick and immediately pulls back and rolls right. The sharp nose-up command on the side stick initiates the first stall warning, but only briefly. 6:17. The plane for a short time is brought back to level flight, but the first officer with his hands on the side stick begins to pull back again, and the plane begins to climb. Air traffic control, watch as the plane's altitude begins to rapidly increase. Flight 8501 soars with a peak rate of climb of 11,000 feet per minute. The first officer keeps pulling back on the side stick, exacerbating the nose-up attitude, all while the second stall alert would begin to sound. The nose momentarily drops, but again the first officer pulls back, creating a third stall warning. This time, the plane exceeds the cleared altitude of 34,000 feet and continues through 35, 36, 37, nearly reaching 38,000 feet of altitude. The airspeed begins to plummet. From their previous indicated airspeed of 270 knots before the crisis began, it is now reduced to below 200. In a matter of seconds, airspeed is reduced further to below 100 knots, with a nearly 50-degree nose-up attitude. Key to note here that the Airbus attitude indicator would have displayed clear red arrows on the display to encourage the pilot to lower the nose. The first officer, likely disorientated, has got audible alerts going off in the cockpit, and there's the captain telling him to, quote, pull down. Immediately to anyone familiar with basic flight controls, this repeated call to action by the captain sounds contradictory. Pulling down on flight controls does not lower the nose. In fact, the first officer was doing just that, pulling down on the side stick. But this raises the nose. Captain Irianto on several occasions tells First Officer Plaisel to pull down. The correct phrasing could perhaps have been something like push down. That would more clearly indicate the correct action needed to prevent a stall. At 6:17 and 30 seconds, the flight data recorder begins recording inputs on the captain's side stick. He does not communicate that he is taking over control of the plane. Normally, there is a dual input warning to tell the pilots when both side sticks are in use and are contradicting. It is drowned out by the stall warning. The captain does attempt to switch side stick priority. There is a takeover button on the side stick, the primary autopilot disconnect. It also gives that side stick priority, but according to investigators, he needs to keep it pressed for over 40 seconds. The first officer has evidently lost situational awareness. He speaks, reverting to his native French to say, "What's going wrong?" At such a low speed, the Airbus enters another steep left roll. But with almost no significant airflow over the wings, they can't get the plane to roll back to neutral, though both pilots are pushing right on their side sticks. There is not enough aerodynamic force for them to now manipulate the flight controls. They are helpless as the plane overbanks to the left, almost inverting at 38,000 feet. 6:17 and 41 seconds, the plane has reached its peak. Now, with zero energy left to give, the plane enters an aerodynamic stall and begins to drop. Now accelerating towards the sea, the Airbus enters a nose-down attitude, but with almost zero forward momentum. The pilots were able to level the wings, but there is a fatal lack of lift here. The wings aren't being fed the energy they need. Still, the pilots were trying to bring the nose up, in doing so exacerbating the stall. The captain couldn't believe what he was seeing on his instruments. The airspeed was far below the stall speed and fluctuating. He reaches to switch the data source of his primary flight display. What he was seeing was the truth. The plane falling from the sky with an accelerating rate of descent, airspeed far too low. The captain does try to lower the nose, but the first officer, as recorded on the flight data recorder, is still pulling back on the side stick. It has often been reported that Flight 8501 was descending towards the sea at a rate of 12,000 feet per minute during this time. This, whilst not incorrect, is actually just the average rate of descent from the beginning of the stall. At one point, the plane reached a maximum rate of descent of around 20,000 feet per minute. That is converted to about 230 miles per hour. 230 miles per hour going down, not forward. This was a horrifying final few minutes of the lives of everyone on board. At 6:20 and 36 seconds, they've run out of time. The Airbus A320 impacted the Java Sea with a nose-up attitude. Upon impact with the water, the plane was obliterated. The lives of 162 people were lost in an instant. Contact was lost with the plane about here, about 60 miles off the coast of Borneo. Air traffic control quickly reported the plane missing. After all, they did just observe it plunging towards the sea on their radar. Later that morning, residents on the island of Belitung began reporting sights of wreckage floating on the water. Fishermen who set out into the Java Sea that morning also reported hearing a boom-like sound, likely the aircraft hitting the water, if anything. No one really knew what to make of all this just yet. Arrivals in Singapore labeled the flight as simply go to counter. Relatives expecting the arrival of their loved ones in Singapore were taken to a private room in Terminal 2 and were told that the plane was missing. In the meantime, the Singapore military had prepared 2 C-130 planes ready to assist in the search and rescue effort. The Indonesian Navy was already out there looking for any sign of the plane. The Indonesian Air Force even deployed a Boeing 737 reconnaissance plane. Despite the efforts of multiple countries, on December 28th, the plane was not found on the first day. The search was called off once night fell. The search continued on Monday, December 29th. Indonesian authorities put the word out for people to keep an eye out for any wreckage on the water and to report it to authorities. In response, reportedly thousands of fishing vessels set off into the Java Sea to find the plane, many just from local Indonesians. By this time, the search effort grew into a large-scale international effort. Sea vessels not just from Indonesia and Singapore, but also Malaysia, South Korea, Japan, China, Australia, and even the United States joined the search effort. A breakthrough would come in on the evening of Monday, December 29th. One fisherman returned home that evening after spending more than a day at sea. They had no idea about this missing plane, but he did report seeing metallic objects out in the region he was at, some of it colored red, like that of an AirAsia plane. The fishermen contacted local police, reported the position, and they then focused a search effort in that region of the sea. Sure enough, they were able to confirm that AirAsia Flight 8501 had crashed at sea. Amongst the first recovered fragments of the plane included one of the emergency exit doors found on the wings. A life jacket and passenger luggage were also pulled from the sea. The first sonar images of the plane's underwater wreckage were taken on December 30th. Salvage teams got to work recovering wreckage from the seabed. The Java Sea is shallow. On average, it has a depth of less than 50 meters. Contrast that with other seas and oceans. Whereas it took nearly 2 years for investigators to find the wreckage of Air France Flight 447, for example, a remarkably similar accident actually, AirAsia Flight 8501 was found in a matter of days. AirAsia had actually allowed the relatives of the deceased access to live underwater cameras, a move that some have criticized as it led to grieving families witnessing the lifeless bodies of their loved ones in the water. Some completely broke down, others reportedly fainted at such a sight before the cameras were swiftly switched off. As the new year was brought in, much of Flight 8501 was salvaged, including many key components such as the tail. Of the 162 passengers and crew lost on the flight, recovery teams were only able to account for the remains of 116. No trace of the remaining 46 people were ever found. On January 12, 2015, perhaps the greatest breakthrough in the investigation was made. Divers and recovery teams spotted a bright orange object amongst the wreckage. The flight data recorder had been found. The following day, the cockpit voice recorder was found nearby and retrieved from the sea. Initial speculations into the cause of the accident suspected the weather. Reports from the time suggested that some speculated that icing had damaged the plane's engines. As the investigation went on, though, weather was ruled out as being much of an influence. From the evidence on the black boxes, coupled with the already available radar data, analysis of the wreckage, and the aircraft's flight control computers, investigators were able to piece together what happened. An erroneous signal induced by the failure of a solder joint resulted in a fault displayed on the pilot's ECAM. As the standard steps failed to address the issue, the captain took a different step to reset the flight computers by pulling the circuit breakers. Upon doing so, the Airbus reverted to alternate law, removing the flight envelope protections usually afforded to Airbus flight crews. Disorientated, the flight crew had inadvertently brought the plane to a deep stall scenario. The first officer, by use of the side stick, brought the plane into a high rate of climb, bringing the aircraft outside of the flight envelope, inducing a stall. The pilots failed to recover the plane. The final report was published on December 1st, 2015. The report did not conclude that pilot error was necessarily the cause of the crash, but does go into intricate detail regarding the Airbus systems, the flight computers, and fly-by-wire protections. It is absolutely well worth your time to read if you get the chance. The thing to remember is that those pilots were disorientated whilst at the controls of a highly technical plane, confronted with a series of events they really weren't expecting. Obviously, we'll never know what these men were thinking during that time, but it is easy to see how panic or desperation could have contributed to those flight control inputs during that critical time. Investigators recommended a number of safety improvements, including new training to improve pilot competence. AirAsia had met with investigators and have since implemented additional safety measures in the cockpit. AirAsia continues to fly the A320 and is actually one of the largest operators of the Airbus globally. Since Flight 8501, no Airbus plane has ever been lost in a similar accident. Hello everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. If you have enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like and hit the subscribe button. And what's the other thing? Oh yeah, ring that bell. Must make sure I get all of the YouTube lingo in there somewhere. Yeah, if you've enjoyed this one, stay tuned as I am at work on the next one. However, that won't release until, say, mid-September. This video, though, I have wanted to make for a while. It has been widely requested for some time. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of this video? I reckon this one has turned out really well. I'm really happy with this video. But we must swiftly move on because it is that time where I must take a moment to thank my amazing patrons over on Patreon for their continuous generous support to the channel. Honestly, the support over on Patreon these past few months has been crazy, ever since I implemented the new, less stringent production schedule. The support has been amazing. I really can't thank these guys enough. The names of Patreon contributors is scrolling on the screen right now, so if your name is right here, then thank you so much. Shout out to A. Howard, Ed Theabach, Brian Fevens, Little Josette, and Julian Warhurst, who literally, Julian got in on the shoutouts right as I was about to record this segment, so perfect timing. Those guys pledged at the mid-tier these past couple of weeks. At the highest tier, big thanks goes out to Solstice V and Brett. These legends are amazing. Thank you all so very much. I really appreciate it. If you yourself would like to support the channel further, you can join the Disaster Breakdown Patreon from just £1 per month, and the link to that will be in the pinned comment below. And there you can also find my Twitter, and all patrons get early access to all new videos 2 days before they go out publicly. That is all from me for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you next time. Goodbye!